Steve Mann here doing the junkyard crawl at Burniston Auto Wrecking in Burniston, Mass. And something to keep in mind is that Detroit automakers often play follow the leader. And a great example of that is the 1964 and 65 Chrysler Imperial Crown, like this one here. If you look at the Lincoln Continental of 1962, you can see a pretty bold design, blade-like fenders with chrome strips, and very less is more styling. Well, the fellow who designed these was Elwood Engel, who left Ford and came to Chrysler just in time to design these. So if we look at the Imperial from 1964-5, what we see is an awful lot of Lincoln Continental right there, this form here, in the tops of the fenders, running all the way down. So it's an interesting thing where Elwood Engel came along and really transformed the Imperial. Now you got to remember that Virgil Exner is the guy in charge of Chrysler design before this, and his vehicles were full of fins and crazy stuff. So Elwood Engel came along and brought in a bunch of, well, refinement and maybe taste. The right stuff at the time. Another detail interesting, 1965 first year for Imperial with these tempered glass covers over the headlights. Crazy, weird stuff. Only seen for 2 years, 65 and 66. But again, this is something that was proposed for the Lincoln Continental. It didn't make production, so Elwood brought it to Chrysler and made it reality. Let's take a peek at this a little further. 10-inch or 11-inch drum brakes up front. Discs wouldn't come along till 1967 on the Imperial. So those are as big and good as it got. And they're fine. They totally do the job. Inside, again, this is a two-door. And of the 16,422 Imperials built in 1965, 3,974 were two-door hardtops like this one, and leather interior with standard equipment. In fact, these cost $158 more than the four-doors. Again, the base price on this would have been $5,930. But we see a lot of options on this one. We have the Speed Sentinel, which was basically a cruise control. This also was air conditioning, which was found on about 86% of these, and something here on the door pillar, kind of frightening, is classic New England rust. Look how the trim tag is half mint, half beautiful, and half gone. Crazy stuff. But again, this is the trim tag that tells us the options that were baked into this car when it was new. But here you have the power windows and almost like an aircraft, control deck right here. The only downside is these contacts and these sensors, everything inside of these things is now just rotten, solid, frozen. So the restoration on a car like this is going to be an uphill battle. And I hate to say it, that the upside on this thing is you'd probably spend $120,000 to make this into a $60,000 car, so it's not a winner, but we can still learn from it. Now, something cool at the back is, again, another 11-inch drum brake, and these were standard equipment. These have the 8 3/4 rear axle, same center section pretty much as found in a Roadrunner or a Hemi Cuda, whatever you want. But right there, this is a traction bar. That was there to stabilize the rear axle and reduce the incidence of axle hop on hard acceleration. Well, guess what? Instead of being a tube or a strut, that's actually a flat leaf spring, which actually flexes. So that was part of the design work that went into making the Imperial as quiet and smooth as possible. But that particular part right there saw another use in the Dodge Custom Sport Special. This is a brochure from that, and these were some of the first muscle trucks. See the bucket seats inside? Well, that was the tip of the iceberg of what made the Custom Sport Special so cool. There it is right there. The stripes over the roof and over the hood were part of the Custom Sport Special package. Now, you could get, a slant 6 or a 318, but you could also get the 426 wedge in this. And when you did, you got rear axle struts. Well, guess what? Those struts were the exact same parts used on Imperials like this. So it's another example of parts bin engineering. Why reinvent the wheel? If you have the parts in stock, well, use them over. Now we see, of course, leaf springs on the back of this thing, torsion bars up front, and again, Cadillac, which would have been the natural competitor to this car, would have had coil springs in the back. Lincoln Continental, I believe, had coil springs in the back. But again, Chrysler was all about leaf springs from the top Imperial down to the Dodge Dart, but they work. Another thing too is Elwood Engel's Lincoln Continental styling touches included the faux Continental carrier, but instead of being rounded on the Lincoln, Chrysler application, they squared it off, but there's no doubt this is inspired by the Lincoln Continental, this faux spare tire, the Continental spare tire hump, as it were, inside the trunk, which is huge, a lot of room in there. And we can see here very unique wheels on Imperial, different from Chrysler. These are the 5 on 5 1/4 inch wheel pattern, massive, used all the way back into the late 1940s. And again, this particular wheel and hub design was not used on Dodge or Plymouth or Chrysler. Specifically, these were used on Imperials, but just a massive trunk compartment on this puppy here. And again, that's a 5 on 5 1/4 inch bolt pattern. So there's no Craig or SS Mag wheels that can fit this thing. So these are kind of unique in terms of when you try to customize them. If you use the original hubs, it's an uphill battle because of that bolt pattern. But we can see here, you know, the 2-door slab-sided, very much like a Lincoln Continental of the 1962 through 1968 era. And the door on this side doesn't open, but again, this is a hardtop. The windows go down and there's nothing but open air to enjoy inside. Now we go under the hood, and as would be expected, the engine is long gone. Now this 1965 would be the final year for the 413. 1966 would bring the 440, but that is a Chrysler torque flight. Something very special here. That's a 727 torque flight that's cable operated, but for the first year has a slip yoke on the drive shaft end instead of the ball and trunnion. So this transmission right here, 62 through 65 max wedge and race Hemi clone builders, that tranny right there is probably worth about $500 to $1,000 as a core because of the fact it's cable operated. It'll work with push buttons, and it has a slip yoke type drive shaft, which gets away from the ball and trunnion, which is a little confusing and problematic for beginners in the world of Mopar stuff. But that tranny right there, it's surprising to see it still in place. Now we also see on this one, power steering standard on all Imperials. It did have power brakes at one point. The booster's gone, but here is the single pot master cylinder, which would have been standard fare till 1967 when dual cylinders came along. And of course, power brakes, disc brakes were also available, but drum brakes up till 1967 on all of these Imperials, except for the Osco Lambert safety brakes of the late 40s, early 50s, whole different thing for another time. Now, one thing to keep in mind is we see right here the torsion bar front suspension on this. Here are the longitudinal torsion bars. And there they are on the passenger side and the driver's side. These again are the torsion bars, whereas Cadillac and Lincoln had coil springs up front. Torsion bars work pretty good, but this is also a body-on-frame Mopar. You can see here's the front of the frame right here. These frame rails go all the way back to the rear bumper, right here on both sides. And the point of that is that, you know, unlike the Dodge Dart and the Plymouth Valiant and the B-bodies and Chargers and stuff, which were unit construction by 1965, this is a full-frame car. Imperial was always full-frame until 1967 when they finally went semi-unitized and went to the C-body platform. So that was another thing that helped to make the Imperial kind of like a bank vault on wheels, the body on frame with lots of insulation and isolation to keep it from flexing and making noise. Now the AC on this car would have been a $462 option. The pump is gone, but the firewall, that equipment is still there. And about 86.9% of all Imperials in 1965 got air conditioning. So here it is, you know, again, here's a nice example right here of the blade-like construction. And again, if you ever see a 62 through 69 Lincoln Continental, you'll see this very same form right here. Again, they're from the same parent, Elwood Engel. In fact, Elwood Engel also had a major hand in the styling of the Plymouth GTX, the Dodge Charger, the Roadrunner, all those vehicles. He was the head of styling at Chrysler Corporation. Elwood Engel came from Ford. And we also saw that happen with Hal Sperling, who went from Ford in 1977 to Chrysler, where he fathered the minivan. So again, Detroit quite often plays follow the leader and trade the leader. And again, the 1965 Imperial Crown 2-door hardtop is a great example of how, well, Chrysler followed the leader, the Lincoln Continental, and made their own way. Now, these weren't particularly popular. I have to say Cadillac and Lincoln outsold Imperial pretty much all the way, but Chrysler had to play along. They had to have a pinnacle car, a premier halo model, and this was it. Now, there was also a convertible version of this thing. Those are very rare, like 600 made, very rare and unusual cars. But again, that's the story of how Chrysler played follow the Continental in 1965. But if you like this video, be sure to subscribe to the Steve Maggs YouTube channel and stick around. There's plenty more from Bergenson Auto Record.